All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's live cooking demonstration. Today we'll be making a basil chickpea flatbread, which you can see displayed on the screen there. Bear with me just a moment as I get my camera set up, and then we will get started with today's demo. All right, good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Ryan Smith. I am the Wellness Program Administrator with Employee Development and Wellness Services at Georgia State University. By trade, I am a registered dietitian, so I deal with all things related to food and nutrition, and I am very excited to be cooking with you today. As I mentioned, we're going to be making a basil chickpea flatbread. You'll see me make it today, and then we'll be sure to provide you with a copy of the recipe and the nutrition information so that you can make it yourself at home if you're interested. Just a couple kind of ground rules before we get started. We are going to be recording today's session. We record it so that you can watch it again later if you're interested in cooking alongside me, or in case you want to share it with a colleague who may not have been able to attend today. Additionally, we're going to be taking advantage of some other WebEx features. On the right side of your screen, you should see some chat box options. Throughout the course of the presentation, we highly encourage people to share your thoughts, your feedback, any comments or questions you might have. We often have people who are interested in substitutions or knowing a little bit more nutrition information about certain ingredients, and we really want to encourage that. So if you've got tips for me or other audience members, put them in the chat. If you've got questions, we'd love to hear them. And at the end of today's session, we'll be sure to take the time to go through each question and comment and address it. Additionally, as you're watching me cook, depending on how your WebEx layout is set up, you may have some dialog boxes down here that could be blocking part of the view. If any part of the table is obscured a little bit, at the top right of your screen, you should have some layout options that will allow you to change to a focused view or an active speaker view, and that should make it easier for you to see my video and what I'm talking about as we're cooking today. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. As I mentioned, we're making a flatbread, and as a dietitian, a lot of people think my job is to tell them what they can't eat. That would not be a very fun job if that were true. What my job is to do, though, is to help people find healthy swaps and healthier versions of the foods that they already love. So speaking from personal experience, I absolutely love pizza. It is one of my favorite foods. But of course, I'm a dietitian. I'm trying to take care of my body. I really want to stay healthy. So the question is, how do we take something like pizza, which is traditionally seen as having some nutritional problems, not being super healthy, how do we turn that into a healthier, balanced meal? And that's exactly what we'll be doing today. So let's talk through all the ingredients that we've got in front of me. I've got some mozzarella cheese and some Parmesan cheese, and we'll talk about cheeses here in a moment. I've got 2 cups of fresh baby spinach, 2 medium tomatoes. We've got about half a cup of fresh basil, and I'll talk about where you can get some of that from as well. I've got a can of chickpeas or garbanzo beans that I've rinsed and drained. We've got a 1/4 cup of unsalted cashews, and then we've got some oil and some different seasonings that we'll be using. And I'm going to talk through all of those as we get to them. But I do want to talk about what we're going to make this on. We're going to be using a pre-made store-bought pizza crust to save time, because another thing we want to do is we want to make healthy easy to obtain. We want it to be quick and simple whenever you want to whip up something healthy. So I'm not doing anything too fancy. This is just a thin crust pre-made crust from Kroger, and whenever you're buying these, there's a pretty big range of what you'll find nutritionally. I encourage you, when you're at the store, to look at the nutrition label, pick up the back of it, check out the package information. And something to pay attention to is going to be sodium. The salt content of these crusts can vary a whole lot. If you're able to find a whole wheat version, that's great. You're going to get some extra fiber, some extra B vitamins out of it, and that's going to be a healthier choice. If you can't find a whole wheat option, or you don't like whole wheat options, again, look for something that's going to be a little bit lower in sodium content if you can. This one right here, the Kroger brand, is very reasonable. However, while shopping, if you are really trying to watch your sodium, maybe you have high blood pressure, maybe someone in your family or someone you know who you want to make this for has high blood pressure, there are still other options. This is also a Kroger brand. It's their Simple Truth organic brand. Now, I didn't buy it because it's organic. I actually bought it because I thought it was really interesting to compare the sodium amounts. So if we look at this Kroger brand one, which like I mentioned is a perfectly healthy option, in 1/4 of the pizza crust, there are 230 milligrams. And what that translates to is about 10% of your daily sodium per serving. Now, in this one, in a serving, there is only 2% of your daily sodium per serving. So that is actually surprisingly low. Even as a dietitian, I was really, really shocked to see that they made such a low sodium variant of this. Now, there's going to be a flavor difference when there's less salt, but we are already adding so many tasty things like the cheese. We're going to have a little bit of salt in the base that we put on the flatbread. So we can kind of control the amount of sodium we put into it by picking a lower salt option. So I thought that was really interesting and wanted to make people aware in case you really do need to watch your total salt intake, if you've had a doctor tell you that, or again, if you're maybe making food for a family member or a friend who needs to watch it. The Simple Truth option here is very, very low in sodium. Now, I'm going to actually be just using the regular crust today because I've already opened this package, and I'm going to save that and probably make another one later on. So this is about an 11 to 12 inch diameter pizza crust here. And what you're going to need is a baking sheet. You're going to want to line it with some foil and then just set the crust on there. So I've got a baking sheet here with some foil. I'm just going to set it down, and we're actually going to push this to the side for now because this flatbread is a little different. We're not going to have a tomato-based sauce. We're actually going to make a chickpea and basil spread, where the name of the recipe comes from, that's going to give us all of our flavor and our base. So I'm going to use a food processor here. This is just a medium-sized one. If you've got a small one, that will work as well. If you've got a big, powerful one, that's going to be even better. But make use of what you've got at home. If you do not have a food processor, there are still options. They're just going to take a little more work. We're trying to get the chickpeas down to this fine consistency so we can easily spread it. So you could use a potato masher, the back of a spoon, something like that, to press down the chickpeas and really mash them down and mix all the other ingredients together. Like I said, it's just going to be a lot more work to do that. So a food processor is really going to come in handy. So the first thing we're actually going to do is I got a 1/4 cup of the unsalted cashews here, and those are going to add a little bit of protein, but also a lot of savory flavor. They're going to add some healthy fats to what we're making, and it's going to make this really filling, which is nice, but we're getting it from a healthier source, which is nuts. So the first thing that we've done is we've put in the cashews, and if you've got a small food processor, go ahead and pulse the cashews right now. So chop them up a little bit using the food processor to get them into smaller pieces before you add the other ingredients. And the reason I say that is if it's a small one and you stack everything too high, you may not be able to fully use the food processor. It may get stuck a little bit, and you want to make sure the cashews get chopped up. This is a medium-sized one, so I'm probably okay, but just to be safe, we'll go ahead and pulse it. And unfortunately, there we go. Unfortunately, my big, nice Ninja blender that if you've watched these before, you've probably seen me use, we had a power surge a couple weeks back, and it completely blew out my big, fancy Ninja food processor, which I am still recovering from the loss of. But thankfully, we've got a medium one here that I'm able to use. So I chopped those up. Doesn't have to be super fine right now, but just get them into some smaller pieces. Next, we're going to go ahead and add the chickpeas in. So the chickpeas are going to add a lot of fiber. They're going to be another plant-based source of protein to really bump up the nutritional content of this. And they're going to give a lot of flavor to what we're doing here. Now, let's add some other things to give it some flavor as well. So we are going to be using minced garlic. You can use fresh cloves of garlic, but I like using minced because it's really convenient. You can keep it in the refrigerator and it lasts for a long time. If you're using fresh garlic, go ahead and use 1 clove. If you're using minced garlic, just use ½ of a teaspoon. Unless you really, really like garlic, like I do, and then you can add a little bit more. I talk a lot about how I typically will add extra garlic to anything I make because it's one of my favorite flavors to put in things. Okay, now the next thing that we're going to add is a little bit of black pepper, just 1/4 of a teaspoon. Feel free to add more if you like. And then we're going to add some salt. So again, I talked about how pizza traditionally is very, very high in salt. And we're trying to cut down on that. We're trying to make a healthier option. So we're just using a 1/4 teaspoon of salt here. Not very much, a little goes a long way. And remember that we've already got some other things adding salt to this. The canned chickpeas had some salt in them. Our pizza crust is going to have a little bit of salt in it. So we don't have to add too much here because a lot of those flavors are already working together for us. Next, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of olive oil. You can really use any vegetable oil of your choice, but I think olive oil has a really nice flavor profile for the sort of Italian flavors that we're going for. It's going to work really nicely. And then the last thing that we're going to add to really give it that flavor is going to be basil. Now, when you go to the store, you've got a couple options. There's dried basil, which you could use here, but it's not going to taste quite the same. There's fresh basil that they sell in these little plastic containers. They're a little pricey. It's about $2 per container, and you don't get a whole lot. However, if you like basil, you can buy a basil plant, which I've actually got right here. It's looking a little sad right now because I've harvested it twice in the last day because I've made this recipe a couple times as I was preparing for this, and I'm about to make it again right here. But the basil plants are only a couple bucks. Then you can get more basil off of it over time. You can use it in all sorts of different things. So if you like basil, that's a great investment, and it's really not that much more expensive than just buying the containers. So I've got 1/2 cup of fresh basil leaves here, and I'm just going to put them in. So our next step is going to be to process this and blend it all up. Now I mentioned not everyone may have a food processor, and it's going to take a lot more work if you don't. What you'll want to do is mash the chickpeas, cut the basil leaves into fine little strips of it, really try to dice them up into small pieces. And then you'll have to do the same with the cashews. The cashews are going to be a little trickier. You're not going to be able to get them quite as fine as we are, but if you chop them up, it will still work. Ultimately, at the end, we're going to have a spread that you just want to evenly coat the pizza crust with. So if you're chopping by hand, you will still be able to make it work, but we're going to go ahead and use the food processor here. And what the recipe describes is we're looking for a sort of sandy texture or consistency. The reason they say sandy is the chickpeas are kind of this sand color, this beige or tan color. And once we've processed it, you'll see what it looks like. It's going to have a lot of green in it, though, too, from the basil. And as always, with anything that you're making in a food processor that you're going to be using it for, you may have ingredients that tend to stick to the sides. And if that happens, you can always take a spatula, have one handy, and just push them back down towards the blades. In this case, I'm looking at it, and because I'm using a slightly smaller food processor, I see there are some chickpeas that are still whole. And whenever I see that, I know I need to push it down with the spatula, make sure that everything is able to get reached by the blade and it's not sticking to the side, and then we'll do another quick run of it. So I'm just going to move it back over here and pulse it just a couple more times. And now I can see that this is looking closer to what we want. So I'll try to show you there. Maybe you can get a look at it. You can see the green, all the basil mixed in there, and you can see that kind of texture that we're looking for. Again, you just want to be able to spread it on the pizza crust. So before we get to that phase, though, I do want to prep some of our vegetables. So I mentioned here that we've got some spinach. The spinach is taken care of. I've already washed it, so it's good to go. But we do want to go ahead and slice these tomatoes. So I've rinsed them. Nothing too fancy about the way I'm going to slice them. I'm just going to cut the top off of them, get that stem out of the way, and then I'm just going to continue slicing. Now, I like to do pretty thick slices on my pizza. You may want to do thinner ones. I will tell you, with using 2 medium-sized tomatoes, you may have trouble fitting all the tomato on your pizza if you slice it too thin. So that's one of the reasons I like to keep it thick. Now, tomatoes are super, super healthy for you. They are an excellent source of vitamin C, which we know is associated with our immune function, so that's really important. They have some beta carotene in them, which is a precursor, meaning our body can use that beta carotene to make vitamin A, which is important for a number of functions as well. And you may have heard of the word lycopene. So tomatoes are a source of lycopene, which is a powerful antioxidant that has some cancer-fighting properties. It's really good for our bodies. So when we can get tomatoes into our diet, that is excellent. Additionally, talking about the nutritional benefits of the spinach, high in vitamin A. It's got some vitamin C, some vitamin K. There's a lot of fiber. Spinach is incredibly healthy. So it's great that we can get some greens in there. We can get some reds from the tomatoes. The different colors of vegetables often indicate some of the nutrient content that they contain. So when we mix and match and get that nice rainbow, we know that we're doing well for our body. So we've chopped up the tomato slices here. I'm just going to set them over to the side. And let's go back to our pizza crust. So we've got it on a piece of foil here on our cooking sheet. And around this time, it would probably be smart to go ahead and start to preheat your oven. You're going to want to preheat it to 425 degrees. So you can preheat the oven now, get it warmed up while we finish out these steps. We've got 1 more tablespoon of olive oil that I'm going to just pour onto the pizza crust. And I'm going to do my best to kind of drizzle it evenly as it goes down. If you have an oil brush, which looks like this, it's got these little bristles on it. These are wonderful. They allow you to just spread oil around super evenly. So I'm just kind of like painting the oil onto the pizza crust so that every bit of it has a little bit of that olive oil flavor on there. It's really going to make it appetizing. If you do not have an oil brush, they're pretty cheap, but I know a lot of people don't have them because it's kind of a specialized kitchen tool. If you don't have an oil brush, you can get a little messy and use your hands and just kind of wipe it around. Or I have seen people use, if you've got a particularly large spinach leaf or lettuce leaf or something like that, this kind of works like an oil brush. You can kind of paint with the leaf and just smear the oil around, and we're just trying to get it to cover all the different edges. So the brushes are great, but you don't have to have one. I didn't have the brush about a year ago, the first time we made this recipe, so I made use of the spinach leaf, and it worked out just fine. So we've got the oil on there. I'm going to come back over here to our basil chickpea spread that we've made. Take that blade out. And all we're going to do is using a spatula, a knife, a spoon, whatever you've got, we're going to just take this and spread it on the pizza crust. So the first thing I like to do is kind of just dump it all out in a big pile, and then we can spread it around evenly. So this is a little bit of a different thing for a pizza or a flatbread to have. You know, a lot of times we're accustomed to there being a tomato-based sauce or something like that at the base. But we're just going to put fresh tomatoes on it. We're going to get a lot of the nutrition, but we're going to reduce the total amount of salt. Because when you eat pizza, a lot of the salt comes from the tomato sauce. It comes from the crust. It comes from the cheese. If there are meats on it, those all contribute a lot of salt. So we are really, really reducing it with these strategies. So using the spatula, just pressing it down, trying to get it into a thin, even layer, because we're going to top this with all of our delicious vegetables and some cheese so it can get all melty and nice. And you can push as far out to the edge of the crust as you like. If you're someone who likes to have a little bit of a handle on there, maybe leave some space. If you're not too picky about it, I kind of like to just spread it all the way to the edge so each bite has lots of flavor, lots of nutrition. Okay, that's looking perfect, and I can kind of show you what that looks like a little closer if you couldn't see it there. So we just got it spread there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take our spinach leaves and just start throwing them on there. Now, 2 cups of fresh spinach is a decent amount. And as you're putting it on the pizza, you may be thinking, okay, this is kind of a lot of greens. These are stacking really high. This is looking a little more like a salad than a pizza or a flatbread. But because of the water content of spinach, once we put it in that oven at 425 degrees, it's going to cook down and reduce in size significantly. So if you feel a little intimidated by the size of your spinach stack, that is okay. Once it cooks down, everything is going to be nice and compact, and you're going to get a lot of nutrition in each bite. So spread that out as evenly as you care to. Next thing I'm going to do is just take these tomato slices and start throwing them on there. Like I mentioned, if you cut your slices particularly thin, they're going to cook a little more, but you may have trouble fitting them all on the one flatbread. You can see here that, I mean, that's a pretty packed flatbread already with all those tomatoes, but look at all those vegetables. I think about when I get a pizza from a to-go place or carry-out place, frequently, if you get veggies on a pizza, there's a sprinkle of bell peppers, maybe a mushroom here or there, but it does not look like this. We are really changing the nutritional content of what's going into this. Now, in terms of cheese, we are using mozzarella cheese, which is a little bit lower in fat, so that's a plus. We are actually only going to be using ½ a cup for the entire flatbread, which is pretty different from how pizzas usually work. There's usually quite a bit of cheese on them. But our basil chickpea mixture that we have on the crust itself It's got healthy fats in it. It's got some protein. It's got a lot of flavor from the salt and the pepper and the olive oil and the basil mixing together. So we actually don't have to use as much cheese because we found other ways to give this flavor and to give it a lot of taste. So at this point, I like to just sprinkle it on there. I want to get a little bit of cheese on every tomato slice. I want to get a little bit of cheese on all the spinach so that no matter what bite I take, no matter what slice I pull off of this, I'm going to have something delicious. So we're spreading it around here. And there we go. And then over to the side, so that was half a cup of mozzarella cheese. I've also got 2 tablespoons of Parmesan cheese. This just adds a little bit more of a complex flavor to it because we've got different types of cheese. One thing I really like to do with the Parmesan is go around the crust actually and sprinkle a little bit of Parmesan there. Certain pizza places will actually do this. They'll intentionally put a different type of cheese on top of the crust to give it a little bit of an interesting flavor when you get to it. It makes it exciting. But you can also just mix in some of the Parmesan on top of the mozzarella. And I think that'll give a nice little bite to it and give us some more flavor. Okay, so now we've got our crust on the bottom, our basil chickpea mixture with the cashews in it. On top of that, a layer of spinach, our tomatoes, and then our different types of cheeses on top. And now we are good to go. So with your oven preheated to 425 degrees, what you'll do is you will slip this into a middle rack and you will bake it for about 15 minutes. Your oven may vary a little bit. The best thing to look for, though, is you want the edge of the crust to start to turn golden brown, and you want the cheese to start to brown as well. You know when it gets that look, it's so appetizing. That's a good visual indicator. But I would recommend checking on it after about 15 minutes and then kind of deciding if you want to leave it in a little longer or take it out at that point. Now, the demo wouldn't be very fun if all I could show you was an uncooked pizza, so I did make one in advance, and let me grab it here. And I'm going to try not to drop the whole thing as I show it to you. It looks so good. I have made this recipe many times before. And actually, a year ago, when we started the cooking demonstrations, we made this. And it was one of the most well-received recipes that we ever made. It is so tasty. It's so easy to make. And it's still very nutritious. In terms of serving sizes, you can get several servings out of this. The best thing to do is to cut it up into several pieces, of course. And we're going to include the nutrition information with the recipe that we send out, so you can decide what seems like a good amount for you to enjoy. There are lots of vegetables on this, but certainly there's still other things we could do to change the recipe or pair it with other things. For example, you may want to have a nice size slice or 2 slices of this, but maybe pair it with a side salad or some extra veggies to really balance things out even more. If you are someone who enjoys eating meat, you may want to look for a healthy animal protein to put on top of this. Certainly doing things like some diced chicken could be really tasty. That way we're still getting a lean protein, still a healthy source, and keeping with kind of our goal, which is to make this a healthier version of a traditional flatbread or a traditional pizza. So what time is it? 24 minutes. And of course, as always, I talked through a lot of it. So you really can make this very, very quickly. The setup and prep of the ingredients is about 15 minutes and then about 15 minutes in the oven. So within 30 minutes, you can have a very tasty, very healthy meal. And these are great for meal prepping too. The crust that I bought comes in a pack of 2. So you could easily buy enough to make 2 servings of this, cut it up into pieces. You've got your lunch to take into the office. I know a lot of us have started going back into the office. I started last week. And I've had to rethink my lunches again because now we're having to pack things. And as we're transitioning back, we want to make sure that we've got healthy and tasty items that we can prep and bring in for things like that. So again, we're going to send out a copy of the recipe and the nutrition information. I do see we've got some chat box things popping up here, so I'm going to take a moment to address those. Okay, here's a question about, in terms of blending all the ingredients together, could you use a blender instead of a food processor? So you definitely could. With most blenders, what you'll find is that the blades are oriented in such a way that they're more focused on the bottom. So you may have to use the spatula more frequently to push things down towards the blades. What I might recommend doing if you're using a blender, for things like the cashews, blend them separately so that you can definitely get them all chopped up. Maybe blend the chickpeas separately as well. And then try to combine the ingredients just to make sure that you're able to get it all. The benefit of a food processor is the blades are a little wider, so they're able to kind of pull more in and get everything blended together. But a regular blender, you could definitely make work for this. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Okay, here's a question about one of the ingredients. This person says they love tomatoes, but they're allergic to them. Are there any substitutions that I might recommend? Certainly. So tomatoes are healthy. We think of them as going on pizzas or flatbreads a lot, but you do not have to stick with a tomato for this. Certainly, I think some other ways to get in some similar vitamins and minerals, kind of check off some similar boxes while still getting a nice flavor. Bell peppers would be great for this. Dicing up a bell pepper, you could do red, orange, yellow, green, whatever color you prefer. Dicing that up and sprinkling it on top of the spinach would still add those pops of colors. You're still going to get some good vitamin A and vitamin C from that. But that way you can avoid the tomatoes, if you're allergic, if you don't really like tomatoes, or maybe you just don't have any on hand. So I do think bell peppers would work well for this. And in that regard, any traditional vegetable pizza topping you could throw on top of this. I'm a big fan of broccoli on top of pizzas, so chopping up little broccoli florets and sprinkling them on top. Some people like to do mushrooms. There's really no end to what you could put on here. So experiment, have fun, and try to see what combination of vegetables you enjoy. And just remember that that was kind of our goal with this is pizza. It's traditionally bread, so we got a starch, we've got cheese, and then there's usually some meat. But what we've done is we have reintroduced a significant amount of vegetables to that item so that it can be a little more balanced and healthier. So great question. Thank you for that. Okay, I see a question here about some other greens instead of spinach. So spinach works great for this. I have seen flatbreads made with like kale before as well. Kale will get nice and crispy whenever you bake it in the oven. So I think that's a fun option to use too. Really, any of those dark greens will work well. Just know that some of the more bitter ones are going to affect the flavor a little bit. Some people find that kale is pretty bitter and they may not enjoy it quite as much, but I've made pizzas with kale before and I think it comes out really tasty. So that's another thing that you can kind of experiment with and see if that's something that you would like. Okay. Okay, so the next question was asking me to just talk again real quick about the whole wheat crust versus the regular crust. So with whole grain or whole wheat options, what those are going to do is they're going to have some extra nutrients in them. Whenever we have a white grain or a refined grain, so think of whole wheat bread versus white bread or brown rice versus white rice. Whenever we have the white version of something, when they process it, they're actually having to pull out some of those nutrients that are good for our body. And what we're left with is all of the carbs and the calories, but not quite as much nutrition. So if you're able to find whole wheat pizza crust or make whole wheat pizza crust, if you're able to find things like whole wheat bread, or if you're doing like brown rice, anytime there's a grain in your meal, if you find the whole wheat or whole grain version of it, you'll get more B vitamins, you'll get more fiber, and you'll get more protein. So all of those things work really well together to just make it a little healthier. It'll be a little more fulfilling. You'll be satiated or full for a little bit longer, and you get a lot of nutrition benefits. So that's always a great thing to look for. Okay, and next question was just to clarify, we're going to send out a copy of the recording, a copy of the recipe, and the nutrition information, so you can try to make this at home and see if you like it. Again, I cannot recommend this one anymore. My roommates really enjoy it. I've had some other friends try it, and they are all big fans. It's definitely a crowd pleaser and an easy one to make. So I encourage you all to test it out and let me know if you do any fun substitutions and tell me how they work out. In addition to the recipe and the recording, you're going to get a link to a short survey. The survey is just going to ask you for feedback on what you thought of the session, if you've got ideas for new recipes or even other events that we could do as a department. We focus on all aspects of wellness from nutrition, physical activity, mental health, financial well-being. We try to cover all those bases. So we're always looking for new ideas and we're interested to hear what people would like to see. Speaking of other events, we do have another event this week. Tomorrow, Friday at 12 p.m., we have our guided meditation session led by Janet Weiss, our meditation instructor. She is awesome. So if you're looking for a relaxing way to kind of end the week, that is a great session to attend. Again, that's at 12 p.m. tomorrow. And if you aren't already on our email list, every week we send out an email to let people know what will be going on. So if you enjoyed the cooking demonstration, you want to see more events or more events like this, you can email us at edws@gsu.edu, and we'll be sure to add you to our mailing list so you'll never miss any of these events. Now, let me scroll one more time to make sure we didn't miss any other questions or comments here. Oh, here's another. Okay. Okay, so this was someone just commenting about they've actually been learning about eating more whole foods, focusing on more plant-based things. And then while that information is catered more specifically to like vegan or vegetarian diets, that it is still a good bit of information for everyone to listen to. And I agree with that. You know, this meal we made today is vegetarian. It does have cheese in it, so there's an animal product. But the principles of whole grains, of adding more vegetables, of watching our sodium, that applies to every diet out there. And certainly, like I mentioned, you can add animal proteins to things like this, like adding some chicken to it, for example, and you can still have a healthy meal by applying the vegetables and the other principles that we talked about. So everyone's diet's a little different, but we can all still benefit from having more of these healthy foods. So great comment. All right. I think that is everything, and we are just about out of time anyway. So I appreciate everyone for attending. Thank you so much. I love getting to do these, and I love hearing your questions and your comments. Keep an eye out for the email that we'll be sending with the follow-up information. And with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.